The museum hall was silent, the faint echo of footsteps bouncing across polished stone. A single beam of sunlight slanted through a high window, illuminating a small, trembling figure standing at the center of the room. She clenched her hands, knuckles whitening, her eyes darting to a shadowed corner where a painting hung slightly askew. It was a quiet tension, almost imperceptible, yet it radiated outward like a subtle pulse. The air smelled faintly of dust and aged paper, and somewhere behind her, a clock ticked in soft insistence. She shifted her weight, heels clicking on the stone floor, and for a moment, time itself seemed hesitant, holding its breath. Her gaze lingered on a delicate sculpture, a figure frozen mid-step, frozen in a moment of indecision. It resonated with her, though she could not yet understand why. Her shoulders tightened, almost unconsciously, as if bracing against some invisible contradiction. A whisper of wind brushed her cheek from an open doorway. It carried a chill, yet she felt drawn toward it. Every instinct told her to retreat, yet another demanded she step closer. She paused, eyes narrowing, noticing the faint scratches in the marble floor. Traces of someone who had walked here long ago, leaving evidence of motion, hesitation, and doubt. The light flickered as if responding to her indecision, and a shiver ran through her spine. In that silent hall, the tension between what she wanted and what she believed. Her mind wandered to the day's events. The conversation she had with a colleague, the polite smile she had offered, the words she had carefully selected to mask her discomfort. Each recollection pressed against her conscience, stirring a friction she could not shake. And yet, the rationalizations whispered quietly, it was necessary. It was just this once. A quiet, persistent tug-of-war played out in her thoughts, a rhythm she'd come to know intimately. As she moved toward a painting of a storm-tossed sea, she noticed a detail in each brushstroke. Tension in the waves, a subtle clashing of color. Her chest tightened, mirroring the turbulence before her eyes. She recognized in the painting a reflection of her own inner conflict, the push and pull of desire, action, and principle. Each brushstroke became a metaphor, illuminating the contradictions she had been living silently. She remembered a promise made weeks earlier, a decision taken for convenience rather than alignment with her values. The memory returned with vivid clarity. The half-hearted assurance to herself, the polite nod to another, and the subtle, lingering guilt that followed. Her fingers traced the edge of a nearby pedestal, grounding her in the physical while her mind explored moral landscapes. The hall felt endless, a reflection of the corridors of thought winding endlessly in her head. A distant echo of footsteps reminded her she was not alone. The museum, though sparsely populated, seemed alive with whispers of the past choices, past contradictions, past selves. She let her eyes drift over the details of the ceiling, ornate and shadowed, as if the architecture itself mirrored her internal complexity. Every arch, every subtle curve, seemed to echo an unresolved question. Was she acting in accordance with her beliefs, or had she already betrayed them without noticing? The quiet murmur of the museum became a metronome, marking the rhythm of her hesitation. Her gaze softened, resting on a marble bust of thinker, its eyes fixed in eternal contemplation. She saw herself in that still face, frozen between competing imperatives, between public presentation and private truth, her lips pressed together. She was aware, finally, that the tension she had felt all morning was not fleeting. It was an imprint, a psychological weight that required attention. The hush of the museum enveloped her, encouraging reflection rather than judgment. She allowed her thoughts to drift backward, revisiting the layers of her choices. Small compromises, silent concessions, moments of polite compliance. Each recollection was accompanied by a subtle pang of unease, a whisper, what have I done? And what do I truly believe? The quiet was not oppressive. It was illuminating, casting light on corners of her psyche she rarely visited. Have you ever acted in public in a way that felt right, but knew in private it was a compromise? How does that friction echo in your own life? She is called Reina Esconder. Her name carries the quiet symmetry of someone who learned early in life how to move without disturbing the air around her, not out of shyness, but habit, the reflex of a person trained to read the emotional climate before daring to place her own voice inside it. Reina is 28, with a presence that feels composed at first glance, but reveals intricate layers the longer you observe her. Her posture has a certain disciplined elegance, as if her spine memorized the architecture ballet lessons she never took. When she stands in a room, she seems to occupy only as much space as she believes she has permission for, no more, never less. That tension alone tells a story. Her gestures are small, deliberate, almost ceremonial. When she adjusts the cuff of her sleeve, she does it with the same careful precision she uses when sorting through her thoughts. When she reaches for a glass, she places her fingers lightly, as if verifying the object is real before trusting it. Her movements betray an awareness of being watched, even when no one is around. Her face holds an unusual calm, softened by the kind of gentle symmetry people often mistake for serenity. But serenity is rarely the full truth. Her mouth carries a faint downward pull when she's processing something privately, a tiny signal, almost invisible, that she is rehearsing two different answers in her head at the same time. Cognitive dissonance leaves fingerprints like that. Her eyes, a muted brown that shifts with the lighting, do not dart or jump. Instead, they hover thoughtfully, as if pausing on an invisible sentence floating in front of her. You can tell she listens before she reacts. She studies before she commits. She gauges before she expresses. Raina's internal world is textured. Her thoughts move like threads weaving through a loom, intersecting, diverging, twisting themselves into patterns she tries to maintain with quiet dignity. Her mind never lunges, it glides. Even her anxieties approach her gently. Like familiar guests, she is reluctant to turn away. Her daily rituals are small anchor points. A cup of tea she warms in her palms before tasting. A moment by the window each dawn, where she watches the early light smear across the horizon. A habit of writing tiny notes to herself on scraps of paper she never intends to keep. These rituals are her way of stitching coherence into the seams of her day. She lives alone in a narrow apartment perched above the kind of street where nothing dramatic ever happens. The building is old enough to sigh in the evenings. The floorboards creak with personalities of their own, and the walls retain faint scent of coffee and dust. Her space is neat in some corners and chaotic in others. A quiet testimony to a mind that balances order with private storms. She works from home, not out of preference but adaptation. Her role as a freelance archival researcher lets her spend hours surrounded by manuscripts, letters, and old photographs, artifacts that remain honest in their silence. People are more complex. They carry contradictions she hasn't yet learned to hold without trembling. Raina's relationships are gentle but distant. Friends would describe her as dependable, thoughtful, exquisitely careful with their feelings. Yet she rarely reveals her own. She has learned the art of appearing open while keeping entire continents of her interior life untouched. This cautious equilibrium shaped her over years. Childhood taught her that emotional contradictions must be concealed, not questioned. Adulthood taught her that contradictions never disappear. They only rearrange themselves until mind can no longer ignore them. Her patterns form slowly, one quiet adaptation at a time. Cognitive dissonance is already living inside her, though she hasn't yet learned its name. It forms a subtle tremor in her voice when she tells herself everything is fine. It dwells in the distance between the person she longs to be and the role she performs for others. It whispers in the small places, in hesitation, in micro-choices, in swallowed words. Raina is not unstable. She is not lost. She is simply standing at the crossroads between who she believes she must be and who she secretly wishes she could become. And this story will follow that tension with the quiet reverence of a museum curator dusting off an ancient artifact. Her life is about to shift, gently at first, then with the kind of pressure that bends her inner framework. But before that shift arrives, the narrative must sink further into her routines, her world, her quiet contradictions, and the relationships orbiting her. This is where the next part of her journey begins. Morning begins differently for Raina today. The light that usually enters her apartment in a muted wash arrives sharper, like a blade trimmed with pale gold. It cuts across the floorboards and lands against the spine of her desk chair, illuminating the faint fabric fray she never noticed before. She stands in the doorway, holding her cup of tea with both hands, watching how the brightness transforms the ordinarily dim room into something that almost expects a confession. Her phone vibrates on the table. A soft tremor, barely audible, yet enough to ripple the calm she tries to cultivate each morning. The screen displays a message from her project coordinator, Mira. Can you take one more manuscript today? It's urgent. Raina's instinct is to say yes. She always does. She is known for quiet reliability, for stepping in without hesitation, for absorbing responsibility as if it were her role to keep the ground steady beneath everyone else. But her shoulders tense, and she feels an ache uncoil behind her ribcage. It isn't physical. It's that familiar tug, the inner voice whispering that she is exhausted, overwhelmed, stretched thin. Yet the opposing voice rises louder. Say yes. Be dependable. Don't disrupt anything. Contradictory impulses cross paths inside her chest so swiftly she becomes still, as if motion might cause those colliding thoughts to spill into the room. She closes her eyes for a moment, collecting the fragments. She types, "Of course," send it over. The message leaves her device with a small whoosh. The sound feels heavier than it should. This is how her days often begin, with an agreement she doesn't fully feel aligned with, a decision she rationalizes as temporary, harmless, necessary. Tiny mismatches accumulate, each one layering itself like thin sheets of dust settling on artifact. One sheet alone is nothing. 1,000 shape a history. She sets her tea down and opens her laptop. The screen reflects in her eyes, a faint gleam that makes her face appear more tired than she admits. Her desktop is organized in a particular way of someone who craves clarity, but fights a slow battle against creeping disarray. Folders neatly named. Tabs left open for days. Notes scattered like unclaimed thoughts. A new message arrives from Mira with a scanned manuscript attached. 83 pages. Handwritten letters dated 1924. The ink has bled slightly in some places, and the edges look softened by humidity. This is the kind of work Raina usually loves, the kind that pulls her into another century and lets her escape the noise of her own mind. She downloads a file, takes a slow breath, and begins. The letters are beautiful at first glance. Sweeping cursive, loops and strokes that belong to a quieter era. The writer, a woman named Eleanor Vale, speaks to someone she never names. Each letter is saturated with longing, restraint, and complex emotional negotiations. Raina feels her chest tighten as she reads, as if the correspondence is vibrating with something deeply familiar. Eleanor describes wanting one life while living another. She narrates her routines with calm detail, yet her words are threaded with a tension she tries to conceal. She writes about following expectations she didn't choose, performing roles that make others comfortable while leaving her own desires untouched. Raina's breath catches when she realizes she recognizes this rhythm, the delicate dance between self-protection and self-erasure. Halfway through the third letter, she stops reading. Her eyes drift toward the window. Outside, the street is wrapped in its usual stillness. A child's bicycle leans against a lamppost. Laundry sways on a balcony across the narrow alley. A vendor sets up crates of fruit with patient repetition. Everything looks serene, yet Raina feels an invisible pressure tightening around her. Eleanor's words echo in her mind with uncanny precision. It feels as if the century between them has evaporated. She returns to the manuscript, but something unsettled lingers. The next few hours unfold with quiet intensity. The hum of her laptop fan, the distant clatter of someone dragging a chair across their floor, the soft clicking of her keyboard. Each sound underscores a tightening storm inside her. Around midday, she receives another message, this one from her friend Jonah, the closest person she allows into her private orbit. Lunch today? You're vanishing again. Raina reads a message twice. Jonah knows her patterns too well. He has seen the way she disappears into work when she feels emotionally out of balance. Her first instinct is to decline, to protect the fragile equilibrium she thinks she's maintaining. But an undercurrent of loneliness passes through her, a small, fleeting ache she rarely honors. She replies, "Maybe a short walk instead?" His answer comes immediately. "I'll meet you downstairs in 10. She sighs, glances at the letters, and closes her laptop gently, as if trying not to disturb the century-old emotions resting inside it. In the stairwell, the air smells faintly of old wood and cool cement. Raina descends slowly, her fingers grazing the railing. With each step, She feels as though she is moving between two worlds, the one she carefully curates and the one tugging at her from beneath the surface. Jonah waits outside, leaning against the building's exterior wall. His expression softens when he sees her. "You look like you've been staring into the soul of something heavy," he says. She offers a small smile. "A manuscript." He nods knowingly. "Your manuscripts always get inside your head." They begin walking down the narrow street. The breeze carries the smell of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, and sunlight glints off the windows of passing cars. Jonah rambles about a film he watched last night, but Raina hears his voice like background music, comforting, steady, familiar. She tries to respond thoughtfully, but her mind is split. One part listens. The other drifts back to Eleanor's letters, replaying lines that felt too close to her own life. The contradiction grows louder. She is here, present with Jonah, and yet half of her remains suspended inside another woman's unspoken turmoil. He glances at her. "You're somewhere else." "I'm fine," she murmurs. The words sound practiced, almost rehearsed. Jonah slows his pace, studying her face with the kind of perceptiveness she both appreciates and fears. "You don't have to defend yourself with that line. At least not to me." Her throat tightens. A small, fragile silence stretches between them. She keeps walking, hoping movement will dissolve the tension. But it doesn't. Something begins to shift inside her, small at first, then steadily growing. Eleanor's letters, Jonah's concern, her own carefully maintained equilibrium. Everything collects like dust swirling in a sunbeam, visible only when the light hits it from the right angle. Raina senses that this is the beginning of something she can't yet name. A soft rupture, a slow unraveling, a gentle reorganization of the truths she has tried to keep separate. The dissonance hasn't erupted yet, but it has awakened, and the story will now follow her as an inner fault line widens, as new characters enter her life, and as the tension between her lived identity and her suppressed self rises like a tide she can no longer ignore. Later that evening, Raina returns to her apartment with a quiet heaviness that settles between her shoulder blades. The walk with Jonah had softened her restlessness for a moment, but as soon as she steps inside, the air changes. Her home, normally a sanctuary, feels strangely charged, as if the silence is studying her. She moves toward her bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. Paperbacks, hardcovers, journals filled with her own thoughts, all stand neatly in place, yet she feels as though something in the room has shifted position even though nothing actually has. She pulls out a slim volume of poetry and opens it somewhere in the middle. The words blur slightly. She isn't reading. She's searching. For what? She can't say. A soft knock interrupts the stillness. When she opens the door, her neighbor, Mrs. Harlow, stands holding a small envelope. Her white hair is pinned in a loose twist, and her eyes carry that warm curiosity she's known for. "This was in my mailbox by mistake," the older woman says. "Thought you'd want it." Raina takes the envelope, noticing the elegant handwriting on the front. No return address, just her name. She thanks Mrs. Harlow, who smiles kindly before retreating into the hallway. Inside, Raina closes the door with slow care. She holds the envelope for a moment, examining the texture. Thick paper, faintly embossed. The seal is an intricate floral design pressed into wax. Something about it feels deliberate, intentional, almost intimate. She opens it carefully. Inside is a single sheet of paper, folded twice. When she unfolds it, her breath catches. The handwriting on the page is the same as the letters she's been transcribing all day. The ink swirls with the same looping flourishes. The pressure variations match. The spacing, the slant, everything is identical. Yet the date on the letter is today. She reads it slowly, the words unraveling themselves like a quiet whisper. If you're reading this, you've stepped into the space between stories, the one where echoes pass hands. There's something inside you that knows these letters are not only mine. Keep going. No signature. No explanation. Her pulse accelerates. She tries to steady her breathing, but a strange sensation crawls up her spine. Not fear, not excitement, but a disorienting blend of both. She sits on the edge of her bed, holding the letter gently, as if the ink might shift under her touch. A small part of her wants to dismiss it, to rationalize it as a marketing stunt, a lost prop, a coincidence. But the deeper part, the one she has spent years cushioning with logic and routine, knows that something in her has been stirred. And once stirred, it refuses to settle. She places a letter on her nightstand, but her eyes keep drifting back to it. The loops of ink seem to shimmer subtly in the low lamplight, though she knows it has to be imagination. The dissonance inside her, the space where conflicting beliefs grind against one another, grows sharper than ever. She wants the world to remain stable, predictable, contained. But this letter suggests that the boundary she relies on might be thinner than she thought. Sleep becomes elusive that night. She lies awake, staring at the ceiling, watching the faint movement of shadows cast by passing cars. The hours slip by quietly, each one carrying a different shade of unease. Around dawn, she sits upright. Her thoughts feel scattered, like pages caught in a gentle wind, refusing to settle long enough for coherence. She needs clarity, or distance, or perhaps both. In the kitchen, she brews coffee and watches steam rise in delicate spirals. The early light peeks through the curtains, brushing the countertops with a pale, silvery hue. The world outside hasn't fully woken yet. She opens her laptop again, determined to anchor herself in something familiar. But before she can begin working, a call comes through. Her screen displays an unfamiliar number. She hesitates, then answers. A woman's voice flows through the speaker, smooth, measured, with an accent she can't place. Is this Raina Lowell? Yes, she replies carefully. I'm calling from the Historical Archival Society. The woman says, your request for access to the Veil collection has been approved. Raina frowns. I didn't submit a request. A pause softens the line. That's strange, the woman replies. The form was submitted under your name yesterday. It lists you as the primary researcher. Raina grips the edge of the counter. Where is this collection housed? At our East Wing archive, the woman says. Would you like to schedule a viewing appointment? Raina's heart thuds once, twice, then steadies. Something is pulling her in a direction she didn't choose. Yet it feels like a path that has been unfolding behind her long, before she realized she was standing on it. Yes, she says slowly. I'd like that. The woman gives her a time, 2:15 p.m. After the call ends, Raina closes her eyes. She should feel wary. She should feel skeptical. She should feel something anchored in logic. But all she feels is a soft gravity, as if invisible threads are guiding her toward a place where long-buried truths wait like artifacts sealed behind glass. The rest of the morning passes in a blur. She moves through her tasks automatically, her mind drifting in and out of focus. Even the manuscript appears different now, as if Eleanor's handwriting holds tiny signals she missed before. When 1:30 arrives, she takes a cab across the city. The ride moves through neighborhoods shaded by tall trees, old buildings with cracked paint, and storefronts with weathered signs. The sky is overcast, with clouds stretching thin like brushed charcoal. The archival building stands at the end of a quiet street. Tall columns, stone steps, and large windows framed by intricate molding. The structure looks ancient, dignified, almost watchful. Inside, the air is cool, carrying a faint scent of old books and polished wood. The floorboards creak softly beneath her steps. A receptionist sits behind a walnut desk, her expression warm. You must be Ms. Lowell, she says. The materials are ready. Raina follows her down a long corridor where the light dims gradually, creating a tunnel-like effect. Portraits line the walls, archivists, historians, and figures whose names time has partially faded. Their eyes seem to follow her with quiet curiosity. In a reading room, the receptionist gestures to a table where a small box rests. Thick cardboard, tied with a ribbon of deep blue fabric. These, the woman says, are the additional letters from Eleanor Vale. Some have never been cataloged. Raina touches the box gently. Why weren't they cataloged? They were found only last month, the woman answers. No one knew they existed. The receptionist leaves quietly, letting the door ease shut. Raina sits. The chair feels steady beneath her, grounding her just enough to face whatever waits inside the box. She unties the ribbon and lifts the lid. Inside, The letters are bundled in neat stacks, each set bound with thin twine. The paper has yellowed in a soft, graceful way, edges slightly worn, ink faded in places. But the handwriting is unmistakable. She reaches for the first letter on top, but before she opens it, something catches her eye. A small photograph lies beneath the stack, black and white. A woman seated at a desk, writing. Raina freezes. The face in the photograph is Eleanor Vale. But the strangest part, the lamp on the desk, the shape of the window, the pattern on the wallpaper, they match her apartment perfectly. She stares at the photo, her pulse thickening with a quiet dread she can't name. Not terror, something more intricate. A feeling like discovering a door in your home you never noticed, even though you walked past the wall 100 times. Her fingertips tremble slightly as she lifts the picture closer. Raina's world, so carefully organized, begins to tilt subtly, steadily, as though the room has shifted just a few degrees. She inhales slowly, as if the air itself might shatter, because now the dissonance is no longer inside her, it is around her. And the deeper she goes, the more that thin veil between her life and Eleanor's begins to ripple. Leon feels a shift in the room before he sees anyone. That's how perception works when the mind is already on alert. The body hears the world before the ears do. A soft rustle, a presence, the faint static of an emotion approaching. Two figures appear at the far end of the museum hall. Characters who will thicken the psychological maze he's walking into. The first one is Nora Hale, the museum's archival psychologist. Her name is known by people who read journals at 3 a.m., the kind who underline phrases like cognitive schema rupture and mutter them like poetry. Nora isn't intimidating. She's magnetic in the way a riddle is magnetic. She walks as if measuring every footstep against a secret rhythm. Her mind is alive in the subtle frown between her brows, the one she gets when she's solving something nobody else can see. Nora's entire career is built on reading microsignals. The twitch in a cheek when someone lies, the drop in pitch when someone hides fear, the flicker of eyes toward an escape route when someone anticipates emotional exposure. Yet even with all her training, something in Leon's demeanor tugs at her attention. The second figure is Theo March, a soft-spoken illusionist invited for a seasonal exhibit. His specialty is psychological misdirection, not stage tricks, but the deeper kind, the kind that turns a mind inward, makes it question how it decides what is true. His shows aren't for entertainment. They're for disorientation that leads to clarity. The audience usually walks out confused and grateful. Theo is the kind of person whose silence does more talking than his words ever could. Leon, Nora, and Theo don't know it yet, but their paths are about to braid together into a single psychological lesson. Nora approaches first, her voice low and observant. You walked in like someone expecting to find answers, she says, the way a therapist states a fact and waits for the air to respond. Leon gives a small, tired smile. Or trouble. Theo drifts closer, studying him with an intensity that comes from years of watching people deceive themselves. People searching for trouble usually just want clarity, he says. Trouble is easier to understand. Leon raises a brow. Is that a professional guess? It's an occupational instinct, Theo replies. Nora tilts her head, fully focused now. What brought you here? Leon hesitates. The museum is silent, suspended, listening. He answers in the only way someone speaks when their emotions have boiled past clarity, bluntly, without polishing the truth. A lie, he says. One sentence, simple as a bruise. Nora and Theo exchange a glance, not one of suspicion, but recognition. People think psychologists can read minds. What they actually do is recognize patterns. And Leon carries a pattern that's familiar across centuries. A moral identity clashing with a moral failure. An internal narrative cracking under its own weight. Cognitive dissonance blooming like a bruise across the psyche. Nora gestures toward a bench near a dimly lit sculpture. Sit with us. Walk me through the lie. Theo sits beside them but slightly turned away. Close enough to hear. Far enough to observe. He's watching Leon's hands. The way fingers tighten around words that haven't been spoken yet. Leon doesn't start with the lie itself. He starts with the moment before it happened. That's how the mind works during confession. It circles around before touching it. He talks about the conference, the pressure, the internal split between who he believed he was and who he feared he was becoming. Nora listens without blinking. Theo listens without breathing. And as Leon speaks, the museum feels different, like a psychological observatory where human behavior is the artifact. Then something subtle shifts in Leon, a flicker across the face, a quick swallow, a pause that signals the mind taking a hard turn. Nora catches it instantly. "You're hiding the real reason this lie matters," she says quietly. People rarely break down over professional mistakes. They break down over identity wounds. That line hits Leon harder than he expects. He looks at her with a kind of stunned recognition. Someone naming your wound before you do. It rearranges the bones of your silence. "You're right," he whispers. "The lie didn't ruin my career. It ruined the way I see myself." The museum air seems to tighten, as if two truths are colliding in the shadows. Theo finally speaks, his voice calm but sharp. "Then you're not dealing with a lie. You're dealing with a shattered self-concept. That's harder." Leon nods slowly. He knows they're right. And here's where our psychological thread tightens. Humans don't fear being wrong. They fear being inconsistent with who they believe they are. That's the heart of cognitive dissonance. The mind fighting to protect a self-image that no longer fits the truth. Leon has collided with that inconsistency so violently that his internal compass has spun. He's not here to fix a mistake. He's here to rebuild an identity. Nora asks him the question that begins every reconstruction. "What kind of person do you believe you were before the lie?" Leon closes his eyes. A soft breath. A memory unlocking. The first brushstroke of a deeper story we're about to unravel. Leon keeps his eyes closed for a moment longer than necessary. It isn't hesitation. It's the mind gathering courage the way lungs gather air before diving underwater. Nora watches his face shift through micro-expressions. Traces of longing, grief, and something older, like a bruised idealism that has waited years to surface. When he finally speaks, the words tremble at the edges, but the story itself is steady. "I used to be someone who trusted my own intentions," he says. "Even when I doubted my abilities, I never doubted my sincerity." It's the kind of statement people make when their moral identity has been scraped raw. Theo folds his hands in his lap, meaning the lie didn't crack your reputation. It cracked your internal myth. Leon gives a small, defeated smile. "You say it like it's obvious." "It usually is," Theo replies. "People fall apart when their inner biography stops matching the person in the mirror." Nora nods gently, inviting him to continue. Leon leans back, staring at a sculpture across the hall, a suspended figure made of fractured glass, shards held in tension by invisible wires. The piece is titled Integrity, in Motion. It seems almost cruelly symbolic at this moment. "I grew up believing honesty was the safest currency," Leon says. "My father taught me that. He said if you stay honest, the world can't touch you." Nora softens. "And what did your father mean by honesty?" Leon laughs, but there's no humor in it. Confession, transparency, never hiding anything. He believed silence is a kind of violence. Theo tilts his head. That's a heavy doctrine to inherit. Most people learn to differentiate between privacy and dishonesty. Sounds like you never got that distinction. Leon's gaze drops. "I didn't. I was raised to think being good meant being exposed." Nora picks up that thread lightly, the way a conservator handles a fragile artifact. "So the lie wasn't just a lie to you. It was a betrayal of your moral lineage." Leon flinches. The truth lands too cleanly. "My father died 3 years ago," Leon whispers. "And the moment I lied, it felt like I shattered the last part of him that still lived in me." The museum air feels colder now. Not dramatic, just quieter, deeper, a gravity settling in. This is where psychology lifts the veil on narrative. Nora explains softly, her tone steady as a museum guide. When a person sees honesty as the core of their identity, any deviation triggers identity dissonance. It doesn't matter how small the lie is. The emotional response comes from violating the self-concept, not the social consequence. Theo adds, "It's like walking into a perfectly organized archive and knocking over one shelf." The collapse feels total because of what the order meant to you. Leon nods without lifting his eyes. A shadow moves at the edge of the hall, a new presence entering quietly. This is Marin Vale, the museum's curator of behavioral architecture. She designs spaces where emotional responses can be observed, almost measured. She moves like someone accustomed to invisibility, yet carries an authority that bends air around her. Marin steps closer, arms folded. I couldn't help overhearing. Her voice is calm, almost serene, but sharp with intuition. You're carrying an inherited model of integrity, she says to Leon. But inherited models aren't always functional. They're artifacts. Some are worth preserving. Some are meant to be retired. Leon looks confused and intrigued. Retired? Marin points toward the fractured glass sculpture. Your father's definition of honesty worked for him. Maybe it even worked for you once. But identity isn't a museum piece. It isn't meant to stay untouched behind glass. Theo smiles faintly. Marin specializes in dismantling psychological architecture. She's telling you that you're allowed to evolve. Leon lets the idea sit inside him like a foreign object. Marin steps closer, lowering her voice. Tell me about the exact moment the lie happened. Leon stiffens. Nora notices. Theo senses it. Marin catches the reaction immediately. You don't have to explain why you lied. Just describe the moment before it happened. The mindscape, the pressure, the emotional climate. Leon inhales deeply. This is the part his body remembers before his brain allows language. There was a conference, he begins slowly. My supervisor asked if I had completed a report that I hadn't. I should have told him the truth. It would have taken a 10-minute explanation. Nora waits, sensing the crucial fracture point coming. Leon continues. But something in me panicked. Not fear, not laziness. Something deeper. He touches his chest unconsciously. It felt like, if I admitted I was behind, it would confirm every fear I had about myself. That I wasn't competent enough. Not good enough. Not worthy of the trust people put in me. Theo leans forward. So the lie was an escape from shame, not responsibility. Leon nods slowly. I think so. Marin studies him with clinical tenderness. That's not moral corruption, Leon. That's a self-protective reflex. Her voice softens. You didn't lie because you're dishonest. You lied because you're human. Leon looks at her, startled by the clarity. Nora adds gently, shame is the strongest catalyst for cognitive dissonance. The moment you lied, your moral compass didn't just wobble. It revolted, because the lie didn't match your identity. Leon lets out a shuddering exhale. The three psychologists exchange a silent agreement. This isn't about deception. This is about a man confronting a lifelong belief that goodness requires flawlessness. Marin gestures around the hall. This gallery exists to teach a single truth. Self-concept is not a verdict. It's a structure under renovation. The words settle into Leon, not as comfort, but as possibility. The museum lights dim slightly, signaling the transition deeper into the exhibits. Nora rises first. Walk with us. We need to take you to the Hall of Divergent Mirrors. It's part of our identity reconstruction wing. Theo stands beside her, hands folded. Marin waits for Leon to rise. He does. His story is shifting now. No longer about the lie, but the meaning of the self he thinks he lost. And the next section begins precisely at that threshold. The corridor leading to Hall of Divergent Mirrors feels deliberately narrow, as if the building is guiding Leon toward himself, not forward. Soft lights glow from the floor rather than the ceiling, casting long, stretched shadows across the walls. It creates the sensation of walking through a memory rather than a place. Nora walks his left, her presence steady and warm. Theo remains slightly behind, observing the subtleties of Leon's movements. The stiffness in his shoulders, the hesitant rhythm of his steps, the way he avoids turning his head as though he might catch a reflection before he's ready. Marin leads away with quiet confidence, her steps echoing softly against polished stone. The hall opens without warning. It is enormous, cathedral high, with walls lined entirely in mirror panels that bend, warp, stretch, compress, and fragment reflections. Each mirror carries a different distortion. Some are subtle, Others fracture the human outline into geometric shards. None of them mock. They simply reveal emotional truths through altered form. Marin pauses at the entrance. This is where people witness the tension between who they believe they are and the versions of themselves they suppress. Leon's heartbeat quickens. The mirrored air feels charged, as if the room is waiting with an intelligence of its own. Nora steps to the side. Walk slowly. Let the room speak first. Leon takes one step inside. His reflection splits instantly into a dozen versions scattered across the glass surfaces. Some standing taller, some smaller, some blurred, some defined with painful precision. One reflection looks exhausted. Another appears strangely serene. Another seems furious. Another looks young. So young, he can barely recognize the softness around the eyes. Theo moves beside him and gestures toward a mirror that elongates Leon's figure until he looks stretched thin. This one illustrates the psychological experience of overextension. Theo says, people who hold themselves to impossible standards often feel like this on the inside, pulled in multiple directions until something snaps. Leon studies a distorted outline. The elongated version of himself seems to tremble, as if held together by effort alone. That's how I felt the day I lied, Leon admits quietly, like I was being stretched out of my own shape. Marin nods. Not by the situation, by your expectations of yourself. They lead him to another mirror, this one almost deceptively normal. His reflection appears intact, but there's a faint tremor around the edges, a ghost-like ripple that moves a fraction of a second behind him. Nora watches him watch himself. This mirror captures what psychologists sometimes call a lagging self, the part of you that hasn't caught up to the choices you've made. Leon blinks slowly, the truth clicking into place. I made a decision my values weren't prepared for. You made a decision your identity wasn't prepared for, she corrects gently. They continue walking. The next mirror is made of overlapping fragments, each piece reflecting a sliver of him, and I hear a hand there, half a smile in one corner, the shadow of his jaw in another. Theo gestures toward it. Fragmentation. This happens when someone holds two opposing beliefs with equal emotional weight. The self divides to accommodate both. Leon stares at the broken jigsaw version of himself. That's cognitive dissonance, he whispers, not as a definition but as recognition. Marin's voice softens. Exactly, but you're not here for the term. You're here for the emotional truth underneath it. Leon drifts closer to the fractured mirror. The shards capture his face in pieces. He cannot fully assemble. His jaw tightens. His breath grows uneven. I feel like this, he says. Like I'm made of parts that don't agree with each other. Nora steps nearer, her presence grounding. That feeling is not evidence of personal failure. It's evidence of a conflict between your inherited moral script and your lived emotional reality. Leon's throat tightens. He touches one shard gently with his fingertip. His reflection shivers. Marin watches him with a curator's eye. This hall isn't designed to show you who you are. It's designed to show you what happens when a belief system becomes rigid. The more inflexible the belief, the more violently it clashes with new experiences. Theo adds, dissonance is not the enemy. Fixation is. Leon turns to him, startled. Fixation? Yes, Theo replies calmly. You didn't allow your identity any room to adapt. So when a lie happened, even a small one, it hit a psychological structure that had no flexibility. And inflexible structures crack. Leon swallows hard. So it wasn't a lie that broke me. It was everything I believed about myself before the lie. Nora nods, her voice soft as dusk. That's why it hurts this much. A quiet understanding settles over Hall, like snow falling inside the mind. They walk to the final mirror of the chamber. This one is unlike the others. It doesn't distort. It doesn't fragment. It doesn't ripple. It shows a clean, unaltered version of Leon, but the surface is dimmer than ordinary glass, subdued, like moonlight reflected in water. His reflection looks familiar, but faint, a self viewed from a distance. Marin stops beside him. This is the mirror of the unclaimed identity. Leon's voice lowers. Unclaimed? Yes, she says. It shows the person you have not allowed yourself to be. Leon's breath catches. The reflection has softer eyes. Not weak, soft. A person capable of grace toward himself. A version of Leon who doesn't carry his father's doctrine as a burden, but as a memory. A man who can admit a mistake without feeling morally ruined. A man who can tell the truth or fail to tell the truth without collapsing. Leon steps closer. This version looks calm, he whispers. That's because it's not built on fear, Marin replies. It's built on choice. The echo of that word lands deeper than expected. Choice. The museum hall feels immeasurably still. Nora stands beside him. You're in dissonance not because you lied, Leon. You're in dissonance because you've never allowed your identity to be something flexible, responsive, human. Theo adds quietly, you've never allowed your goodness to coexist with your imperfections. Leon's eyes sting. Not with grief, something gentler. Nora steps back, giving him space. Stay with this reflection for a moment. Leon does. The reflection is patient, unjudging. A version of himself not at war with himself. For the first time since the lie, something inside him loosens. Marin watches his shoulders lower, his breath deepen, his stance soften. You're beginning the reconstruction, she says. But there's more work ahead. Theo gestures toward the next entrance, a tall arched doorway where amber light spills across marble. Beyond this hall is the archive of unspoken decisions. It holds the patterns that shape our most private choices. Leon wipes his face with the back of his hand. I'm ready, he murmurs. The hall seems to listen. The doors ahead drift open, and the story continues without breaking the museum's quiet spell. The light inside the archive is different from every hall Leon has walked through. It glows in warm gradients, shifting from honeyed gold to muted amber, like dusk poured across the floor. The air carries a faint scent of aged paper and something faintly metallic, like old keyholes or forgotten locks. It feels intimate, almost private, as if the room exists beneath the surface of thought. Rows of towering shelves stretch into curved pathways, each one filled not with books, but with narrow glass vials. Inside each vial floats a small shimmer, some bright, some dim, some flickering like candlelight fighting a breeze. Each glow pulses with a rhythm that feels strangely familiar. Leon realizes with subtle shock that these aren't objects. They're decisions. Nora steps beside him, her voice a soft whisper that respects the sanctity of the room. This archive collects the choices people never say out loud, the ones they make in silence, often without knowing why. Theo walks ahead, tracing his fingers along a shelf without touching the glass. A person's conscious identity speaks in declarations, he explains, but their real identity speaks through their quietest decisions. Leon breathes slowly, feeling the weight of that. His gaze moves from vial to vial. Some glows are steady, warm, and full. Others flicker with hesitation. A few seem extinguished entirely. Marin approaches him with her calm precision. Every person who enters this room sees only their own archive. These are your unspoken decisions, Leon. The ones you made instinctively, privately, without public justification. Leon looks around at the thousands of glimmers. Are they all mine? Yes, Marin says. Every choice you made when no one was watching. Every pivot you made internally before acting. Every moment where belief pulled you one direction and emotional truth tugged another. He takes a hesitant step forward. A vial to his right catches his attention with a sudden bright pulse. He reaches toward it, and the glass warms beneath his fingertip. The shimmer flickers once, and a scene rises around him, not fully formed, like a watercolor left in the rain. He sees himself at 17, sitting at the kitchen table while his father speaks with stern clarity about what makes a person good. Leon remembers nodding, even though his chest tightened with a quiet disagreement he never voiced. The vial dims slightly, then settles. That, Theo says, appearing beside him, is a decision you made to silence your inner voice to preserve harmony. Leon exhales. It felt easier. It usually does, Theo replies. But every time you choose silence over authenticity, a fracture forms. Small at first, invisible, but cumulative. Leon moves on. Another vial calls to him. This one quieter, dim light pulsing like a distant heartbeat. When he touches it, a memory returns of him helping a friend years ago, offering support he didn't have emotional energy for. He had said yes because saying no felt like a betrayal of who he thought he was supposed to be. Nora steps closer. This was a decision shaped by identity, not preference. A choice you made to protect the self-image you learned, not the self you actually were in that moment. Leon's throat tightens. I didn't even know I was doing that. That's why they're archived here, she says. Silent decisions shape us more than spoken ones. As Leon walks deeper into the room, the glow of the vial seems to respond, brightening as he passes. Dimming behind him, the archive feels alive, as though it recognizes the person who created it. One vial, small and sharp of white light, catches his attention with an intensity he feels in his chest before he even touches it. When he reaches out, warmth spreads across his fingertips and climbs into his palm. A scene unfolds. Leon, 3 hours after the lie he told, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall, the truth burning beneath his ribs. He remembers the electric panic, the spiraling guilt, the frantic pace of his thoughts. He had decided, silently, desperately, to pretend everything was fine, to push the dissonance down, to hold himself together through denial instead of vulnerability. The vial dims. Nora watches him with steady compassion. This wasn't just a choice to hide the lie. This was a choice to protect a version of yourself you were terrified to lose. And that's the decision that broke everything, Leon whispers. Marin steps forward, her gaze firm yet gentle. It broke nothing. It revealed a fracture that already existed. Leon's breath trembles. He moves deeper into the archive, as if drawn by instinct. He turns a corner and stops abruptly. At the end of the aisle stands a pedestal made from dark stone. Upon it rests a single large vial, unlike the others. This one glows with 2 lights inside, one warm, one cold, twisting around each other like 2 separate currents locked in quiet struggle. He steps toward it slowly. Theo's voice drops to a reverent hush. This is the central conflict. Every archive has one. The moment 2 opposing values first collided, Leon reaches out. His hand hovers above the glass. The lights spiral faster. When he touches it, the archive fades to black. A memory sharpens with painful clarity. A much younger Leon stands in a quiet suburban backyard at dusk. His father kneels beside him, explaining why their family does things the right way. The sky is lavender. Fireflies drift around them like tiny lanterns. Leon remembers agreeing with every word, because he adored his father's certainty. It felt safe. But then there was a sound, a cat crying softly from the far side of the fence. A neighbor's warning echoed from earlier, that animal scratches. Leon wanted deeply, instinctively, to help it, but his father said with calm authority, "We don't intervene in things that aren't our responsibility. Leave it." Leon froze. Inside him, 2 beliefs struck each other like flint. Compassion is right. Obedience is right. He had chosen obedience. The cat's cry faded, and a fault line formed. The memory dissolves. The archive brightens again. Leon steps back from the pedestal, shaken. I didn't know that moment mattered. Most people don't, Nora says quietly. But your identity crystallized around that conflict. Obedience and empathy living side by side. And when you lied, those 2 currents collided again. Leon closes his eyes. I feel like I've been arguing with that moment my entire life. Theo speaks with a softness he rarely uses. You've been. Marin gestures toward the curving exit on the far side of the archive. We're nearing the integration wing, she says, where your mind rearranges what you've learned. Leon opens his eyes, breath steadier now. What happens there? Nora answers, her tone gentle and anchored. That's where you learn that identity can bend without breaking. Leon nods, the first hint of strength returning to his posture. He walks toward the exit. The vials dim behind him, as if resting. The archive breathes out, and the story continues, unbroken and unfolding with deeper clarity. The corridor changes almost imperceptibly, the way a memory shifts when you finally admit what it has been trying to tell you all along. The walls here are neither marble nor shadow. They are something more unsettling, a soft, almost living texture, like paper that has been written on, erased, rewritten, and erased again. Every inch holds faint markings, almost words, almost confessions. This is a chamber of echoes. It is where the psyche stores the things it said quietly because it believed no one would care if it screamed. As you walk, those faint markings begin to lift themselves from the wall. They aren't sentences. They're the emotional residue of sentences, the tone of a moment, the temperature of a memory, the way a single phrase can bruise a decade. A dim voice speaks, not from a person, but from everywhere at once. Here lie the sentences that alter the life, even when spoken lightly. A spotlight illuminates the first exhibit, a small wooden desk, the kind a teenage girl might have used to study under a flickering bulb. One chair, one notebook, one pen. Nothing extraordinary, yet the air around it carries tension like charged static. This desk belonged, symbolically, to the girl you were introduced to earlier, Mira, in earlier chambers. You met her as a case study, a quiet presence navigating emotional landmines from childhood into adolescence. Here, she is no longer a distant figure. Here, the artifacts hold the weight of her internal atmosphere. The narrator's voice, soft, steady, museum-like, guides you closer. Note the indentation on the paper. She wasn't writing. She was pressing, trying to carve her feelings into something that did not talk back. A projection flickers gently above the desk. Mira at 13, shoulders tucked inward, hair tied back too tightly, the way children do when they want control over at least one part of their bodies. She writes without lifting the pen, phrases she will later cross out, then rewrite, then hide. I didn't mean to bother you. Maybe it was my fault. I promise I won't overreact again. I can fix everything if I try harder. These lines hover in the air like ghosts of self-minimization, and the room seems to contract around them. Not an accusation, but an observation. The narrator adds, "Here we witness the early architecture of emotional compliance, the way a young psyche builds walls out of apologies." A second spotlight reveals another artifact, a broken ceramic cup. Simple, domestic, harmless, the kind of object that shouldn't matter in the story of a human life. Yet in Myra's timeline, it marked the evening when she learned how quickly emotional storms could ignite around something fragile and meaningless. She did not break the cup, but she apologized first, louder than the person who did. Inside the glass case, the cup hums with a faint vibration, a symbolic echo of everything unsaid, or rather, everything said too quickly. A new voice enters the chamber, the psychological equivalent of a docent stepping forward. This is Dr. Hadi Rahman, the clinical observer introduced earlier in the narrative. His presence is calm, sympathetic, analytical. Not cold, simply distilled. He speaks not to judge, but to clarify the artifact before you. Children conditioned to preempt anger often become adults who preempt blame, he says gently. They edit themselves before anyone else can. They shrink before the room requires it. They apologize for taking up the air that was already theirs. His words float but don't linger. They land softly, like feathers that somehow carry weight. The narrator shifts your attention to the far end of the chamber, where a much larger structure rises. It looks like a sculpture made of sound waves, jagged peaks and shallow dips. But upon closer inspection, each peak is actually a frozen moment of tension, a memory flash, a held breath, a swallowed truth. This installation is titled, "Moments She Stayed Small." You can walk through it. As you pass each suspended wave, you hear a faint echo, not a full memory, but a sensory whisper. The breath she held when someone raised their voice. The sentence she cut in half because she sensed impatience. The smile she practiced to make herself appear fine. The instinctive "it's okay," spoken even when it wasn't. These echoes don't overwhelm you. They inform you. The chamber's purpose is not to sensationalize trauma. It is to display the quiet mechanics of psychological shaping, how survival strategies become personality traits, how traits become identities, and how identities sometimes shrink to fit the smallest available space. At the center of the sculpture, frozen in a soft halo of light, is one final moment, Mira at 16, standing in front of a teacher who dismisses her anxiety as drama. She nods. She agrees. She becomes smaller again, not physically, but in posture, expression, energy. The narrator closes a section with a tone that feels almost like placing a velvet cover over a fragile relic. In this chamber, we learn that silence is rarely emptiness. It is often strategy, often armor, often the earliest language of self-preservation. The corridor ahead grows darker, but in the kind of way that invites deeper understanding, not fear. The museum of the mind opens further, and the next exhibit waits to reveal what happens when suppressed echoes begin to reshape themselves into a voice. The corridor widens, but not in any architectural way you could measure. The space feels broader the way a realization broadens, quietly, without grand gestures. The floor beneath you becomes smoother, almost glass-like, reflecting a faint shimmer of light that seems to come from beneath rather than above. This is a hall of adaptive selves. The museum's voice returns, low and measured. Here, the psyche begins shaping itself around the patterns it learned earlier, innovating, complying, surviving. The atmosphere has changed from the previous chamber. The echoing tension has softened into something subtler, a controlled stillness, the kind that emerges when a person learns how to predict emotional weather before anyone else feels the first drop. A single spotlight reveals the first exhibit, a mannequin-sized figure made entirely of translucent layers. Thin, overlapping sheets like pages from different chapters of a life. Each layer is faintly colored, almost imperceptibly, as though someone took emotional states and pressed them into stained glass. This figure represents Mira at 17. Each layer is a role she learned to master. The agreeable friend, the silent daughter, the calming presence, the easy student, the reliable listener. None of these layers are false, but none are fully hers either. They are adaptive, refined, strategic. Dr. Hadi Rahman appears again, not physically, but as a projected silhouette that speaks without judgment. When a child grows up needing to manage the emotional climate, he says softly, she becomes a masterful reader of others, a barometer, a forecaster, but rarely a participant. He pauses, letting the ideas settle in the air like fine dust. A person like Mira isn't pretending. She's surviving with precision. Ahead of you, the corridor branches into 3 paths, each separated by suspended curtains of shimmering film. The narrator guides you to the first path, the corridor of overcompensation. Inside this wing, artifacts appear larger than life. Oversized textbooks, giant planners, towering checklists. These are not playful exaggerations. They're symbolic representations of Myra's instinct to do more whenever she felt uncertain of her worth. A projection forms beside the giant objects. Mira at 18, studying in the dim light of her bedroom long after her siblings had fallen asleep. Her hair falls forward, hiding her tired eyes. She reads meticulously, underlines obsessively, perfects continuously. "If I am perfect," she once wrote in her notebook, "no one will raise their voice." The museum does not comment. It simply lets the line hang, heavy knowing, painfully clear. The second path opens gently into the gallery of emotional neutrality. This wing is colder. Not harsh, just uncolored, like a room drained to saturation. In glass cases sit small vials, each filled with a different shade of muted emotion. Faintly blue sadness, pale pink happiness, diluted red anger. They all look gentle, domesticated, controlled. A soft recording plays overhead, not words, but emotional tones flattened until they're barely identifiable. This exhibit shows how Mira learned to compress her emotions into polite versions of themselves. She became fluent in expressing only what was safe. Mild joy, mild sorrow, mild frustration. Nothing too sharp. Nothing too heavy. The narrator whispers. When a person spends years regulating themselves to avoid triggering others, their emotional palette fades by necessity. You move toward the third path, the chamber of social masking. This space is warmer but eerily curated. Mirrors line the walls, though none show your reflection. Instead, each mirror displays a different version of Mira. Older now, entering adulthood, each one tailored to a specific environment. Mira at work, smiling professionally, Mirror with friends, laughing softly so as not to draw attention. Mirror at home, quiet enough to not be questioned. Mirror in public, composed to avoid misinterpretation. A final mirror stands alone at the far end. This one is blank. The narrator explains. This is not a mirror of who she is. It is a mirror of who she has not yet met. The blankness hums with possibility, not emptiness. Dr. Hadi reappears, his tone almost reverent. Most adaptive cells are not mistakes, he says. They're ingenious survival tools. But every tool has a cost. And the cost here is invisibility, not forced by others, but chosen instinctively as protection. The light in the hall shifts, narrowing into a path that guides you forward. The air grows warmer, more alive, as if the museum itself is preparing you for a transition. Not into darkness, but into confrontation. The next chamber, the narrator says, examines the moment when adaptation begins to strain, when invisibility becomes too heavy, when the psyche starts pushing back, quietly at first, then unmistakably. Ahead lies the turning point in Myra's psychological architecture, a place where silence fractures, not violently, but truthfully. The path narrows before widening into a circular room with no visible ceiling. Light spills downward in a perfect column, illuminating only the center of the chamber, while leaving the edges in a soft, protective shadow. The air here feels heavier, warmer in temperature, yet weighted with something introspective, like the sensation before a long-withheld truth surfaces. The museum's voice lowers to an intimate murmur. This is a chamber where internal tension begins to exceed the body's quiet capacity. A single exhibit stands beneath the column of light, a delicate glass bowl filled to its brim with water. The bowl is flawless, thin, transparent, almost trembling from the pressure of being overfilled. A drop of water hovers above it, suspended unnaturally mid-air. The narrator guides you closer. For years, Mira maintained her balance through careful emotional calibration. But every adaptive system, no matter how intricate, contains a threshold. The drop falls. The bowl trembles. A small ripple climbs the edge, spills, and trails down its side. The fracture begins here. The first rupture doesn't appear dramatic. It's almost imperceptible, more of an internal rearrangement than an explosion. But the museum teaches you that psychological breaking points rarely resemble the storms people imagine. They are quieter, slower. They bloom like hairline cracks in foundations no one checks. A projection flickers to life along the curve wall. Mira at 24, seated at her kitchen table late at night. Her laptop glows faintly against a tired face. She's reviewing documents for a client far beyond midnight, long after she promised herself she'd stop taking on work that drained her. The room is silent, except for the soft hum of her screen. A message pops up in the corner. Another request, phrased politely but tinted with urgency. Her shoulders rise, barely, almost invisible. A micro flinch, not resentment, not anger, just a momentary pause, an internal whisper of no that never reaches her mouth. She types yes instead. Her fingers hesitate before she presses send. The narrator speaks. Ruptures often begin with tiny deviations, a softened boundary, a small moment of self-abandonment, a single yes that contradicts an internal no. The projection shifts. Now she's sitting on the floor of her living room, days later, surrounded by papers she meant to organize but never touched. The room looks unchanged, yet something about the air feels altered, denser, humming with unspoken pressure. Her breath catches for half a second. Not a breakdown, just a static pause, the kind that happens when the body registers an internal conflict the mind still refuses to name. Dr. Hadi Rahman appears as a dim reflection in the glass bowl. Humans often misunderstand breaking points, he says thoughtfully. They imagine collapse, but collapse comes later. The true rupture occurs the moment a person recognizes that the system they designed to protect themselves is now quietly harming them. His words settle into the room like settling dust. Myra's adaptive silence, once protective, now begins to constrict. She feels it not as pain, but as subtle disorientation, a sense that she's performing her life instead of inhabiting it. The circular room grows dimmer, except for the bowl in the center. Another drop forms above it, trembling. This time the narrator whispers. Watch carefully. The psyche does not break in a single moment. It asks permission first. The drop falls. The surface overflows again. A fine crack appears along the rim. Tiny, delicate, easy to miss, but real. This represents the moment Myra's internal architecture first shifts. The quiet beginning of a psychological rearrangement. The threshold between adaptation and exhaustion. She does not yet understand what is happening, but her body does. Her mind begins reading signals she once dismissed. The tightness in her jaw, the pauses in her breath, the strange heaviness in her limbs after long days of talking softly and listening too hard. These are not symptoms of weakness. They are signals of a transformation preparing itself. The light in the chamber flickers gently, as though acknowledging the change. This is a first fracture, small enough not to alarm her, significant enough that nothing will be the same again. The narrator's voice softens. The next chamber will explore what happens when suppressed truths begin seeking expression. A doorway appears on the far end, tall, narrow, glowing faintly like a heartbeat behind frosted glass. Ahead lies the part of Myra's journey where silence begins shaping itself into language. And once language emerges, nothing in her interior world can remain unchanged. The next chamber opens like a slow breath. Its walls curve gently inward, as if designed to hold delicate thoughts without letting them scatter. The lighting shifts again, no longer a single column, but a soft, diffused glow that makes the room feel suspended between night and dawn. On the floor, arranged in a spiral, are dozens of translucent panels. Each one contains a faint moving image, fragments of memory, emotion, conversation. They hum with a soft vibrational undertone, almost like a distant song woven from quiet contradictions. The narrator's voice emerges with careful softness. This is a gallery where suppressed truths begin reshaping themselves into awareness. At the center of the spiral, Mira appears, not as a projection this time, but as an impressionistic figure formed from drifting particles of light, as though her presence is being reconstructed from the thoughts she never voiced. She walks slowly between the panels, unaware she is being observed. One panel brightens. It shows Mira at a small dinner gathering, surrounded by friends. She laughs when someone tells a joke, yet the sound comes a fraction of a second late, like an echo that wasn't originally hers. Her smile fades a moment she looks down at her hands, curls slightly in her lap, as though unsure whether she belongs in the moment she's inhabiting. The museum's voice explains. When dissonance grows, it creates tiny fractures in social exchanges, microscopic hesitations, mismatched reactions, gestures that slightly miss the emotional rhythm of a situation. Another panel glows. Mira is at her workplace, sitting in a conference room. Her colleagues debate strategies while she contributes thoughtful points. Her words are intelligent, measured, even admired. And yet, behind her eyes, the room feels distant, as though she's reading her own sentences from a script she didn't choose. Her expression stays composed, but her fingers tap a faint, irregular rhythm on the table's edge. Dr. Hadi Rahman's voice drifts into the space like a memory. Behavior often reveals what language conceals. Before people admit inner conflict, their bodies speak in subtleties, rhythmic dissonances, tiny pauses, small slips in posture. The narrator continues. Mira senses a shift long before she has words for it. Her emotional landscape rearranges itself in muted shades she hasn't yet learned to name. A third panel comes alive. This time Mira sits alone beside a window in a quiet cafe. She stirs her coffee absent-mindedly, though she has no intention of drinking it. Her gaze drifts between the passing pedestrians and her own reflection in the glass. There's a moment, so fleeting it could be mistaken for a blink, when she doesn't recognize the expression staring back at her. The museum amplifies the moment in slow motion. Her eyes soften, her breath catches. A question flickers in her pupils, but she looks away before the question can mature into thought. The narrator speaks. Here, her interior world begins to surface, not as epiphany, but as discomfort, gentle, repetitive discrepancies between her lived experience and the role she performs. The spiral of panels grows brighter, each illuminating a different scene. Mira politely declining help even when her shoulders feel heavy. Mira accepting commitments that drain her spirit, while insisting she's simply being responsible. Mira feeling unusual fatigue after conversations that once energized her. Mira waking earlier than necessary, not from discipline, but from a subtle restlessness she can't quite place. None of these moments are dramatic. That is the point. Psychological shifts, especially those born from internal contradiction, rarely arrive with thunder. They emerge through faint distortions in daily life, like ripples in calm water that don't match the wind. A new panel rises slightly higher than the others. It shows Mira writing in her journal late at night. The page glows softly beneath the lamp. Her handwriting begins neatly, then gradually becomes looser, more fluid, as though the truth is finding its way through her pen despite her attempt to stay composed. The narrator leans closer. This is the first time her inner voice begins resisting the roles she has spent years perfecting. Her writing shifts from logistical notes to quiet confessions. I feel tired. I'm not sure why I agreed. I thought I'd feel fulfilled by now. Maybe I'm avoiding something. I don't feel like myself lately. She pauses, pen hovering above the page, fingers trembling with subtle vulnerability she doesn't admit aloud. Then she closes the journal gently, as if afraid she has revealed too much, even to herself. The museum dims the projection. What remains in the room is a soft, vibrating tension, the prelude before clarity. Mira stands silently at the center of her own internal archive, surrounded by the evidence of her unspoken truth. The narrator whispers. This chamber marks the point where dissonance begins speaking to behavior, through sensation, through subtle deviations in her daily life. At the far end of the spiral, a set of doors materializes, tall, narrow, and framed in muted brass. They pulse faintly, as though responding to a heartbeat too quiet to hear. Beyond those doors lies the threshold of realization, the place where contradictions start naming themselves. The light dims, leaving a soft glow underfoot. When the doors open, Mira will step into a space where protective illusions she relied on begin dissolving. And once dissolved, they cannot return unchanged. The tall brass doors part with deliberate slowness, as though they have been waiting for Myra's hesitation. A thin ribbon of light spills onto the floor, stretching toward her like an invitation she isn't sure she wants to accept. For a moment she remains still, her outline composed, her breath shallow, her awareness sharpened by the faint tremor inside her chest. Then she steps through. The room on the other side feels markedly different from the chambers she crossed before. It is neither quiet nor loud. Instead, there is an almost imperceptible murmuring, like the indistinct hum of voices behind a closed curtain. None of the words are clear, but their emotional temperature is unmistakable. Conflicted, yearning, unsettled. The walls are lined with tall panels of glass. Behind each panel is a blurred figure, shaped like Mira but never fully formed. They shift subtly, mimicking her posture, echoing her stance. Every time she moves, those figures adjust themselves, but always with a half-second delay, as though they are versions of her caught between intentions. The museum's voice enters the space in a whisper that feels close to the ear. Here you witness the selves she had performed in order to maintain equilibrium. One figure clears, its features softening into view. This version of Mira appears poised, confident, articulate, exactly how colleagues describe her. Yet the scene behind her reveals evenings of silent exhaustion, a mind buzzing with half-finished thoughts, a body cooling tea she never drinks. The narrator adds, cognitive dissonance often disguises itself as competence, not because the person is deceptive, but because the mind avoids the discomfort of acknowledging conflicting realities. Mira takes another step. A second figure sharpens. This Mira carries warmth, generosity, attentiveness. The caretaker, the friend who remembers birthdays, who listens deeply, who shows up without being asked. But the scene behind that version reveals small compromises, declined invitations she secretly wanted to accept, feelings she tucked away to keep others comfortable, boundaries softened to avoid appearing selfish. The voice speaks gently. Every identity she constructed was meant to protect harmony, yet each demanded quiet sacrifices. A third figure glows. This one is more fragile, its outline flickering. It represents a mirror who longs for authenticity but fears that honesty will disrupt the networks of expectation surrounding her. Behind this figure, the projection shows her sitting in her bedroom in the early morning light, hands clasped, spine curved, eyes tracing patterns in the carpet as though searching for the courage to let her inner voice speak. Mira watches these versions of herself with a concentration that borders on ache. She isn't frightened. She is simply aware of how unfamiliar self-recognition can be when filtered through the lens of contradiction. A subtle shift occurs in the room. The glass panels begin to respond to her breathing. Each inhale makes the reflections pulse faintly, and each exhale draws thin cracks across their surfaces. Hairline fractures that branch delicately like frost on a winter window. The narrator explains, "Dissonance thrives as long as separate truths remain isolated. But once awareness grows, these compartments begin pressing against one another, creating fractures in the internal architecture." The lighting dims. Only one panel remains illuminated now, tall, slender, and positioned directly in front of Mira. It does not project a version of her. Instead, it shows two overlapping images. One image displays Mira at a celebratory work event, smiling as her team applauds her success. The other shows her sitting alone afterward in her apartment, holding the award gently but staring past it, as though weighing something invisible. The images don't alternate. They sit atop each other, refusing to blend, refusing to separate. The museum whispers, "This is the moment when incompatible beliefs reveal themselves." Mira steps closer. The overlapping scenes move with an uneasy rhythm, one forward, one backward, like thoughts tugging in opposite directions. Her eyes soften as she recognizes attention. That success should feel fulfilling, yet it doesn't. That she values harmony, yet feels unseen. That she wants authenticity, yet fears the consequences of it. That she believes she is decisive, yet hesitates before every meaningful choice. These are not contradictions created by failure. They are contradictions created by being human. The museum voice grows warmer, almost comforting. Cognitive dissonance is not a flaw. It is a sign that something within her is ready to evolve. The overlapping images brighten. Mira lifts her hand and touches the surface of the glass. The moment her fingertips make contact, the panel fractures, not violently, but elegantly, splitting into hundreds of small, luminescent shards that float upward like fragments of a dissolving constellation. For a brief second, Mira is surrounded by drifting light. Each shard represents a belief she carried. Each one glints with a different memory. Each one carries a piece of a truth she has not yet assembled. Her breathing deepens. There is a steadiness forming in her posture, a quiet readiness she did not possess when she first entered the museum. The voice offers a final reflection before leading her onward. Understanding begins when the mind allows incompatible truths to coexist without denial. Healing begins when those truths are invited to speak. Ahead of her, another doorway reveals itself. This one framed in pale silver, radiating a subtle calm. It signals the next stage. The confrontation with her core belief, the silent assumption that has governed her choices for years. As Mira steps toward it, the murmurs in the chamber soften, resolving into a low harmony. It is the sound of inner contradictions preparing to name themselves. The soft hum of the museum hall surrounded her as she lingered near the last exhibit, a simple glass case enclosing a modest artifact, a handwritten note, folded neatly, its edges slightly yellowed. She traced its contours with her eyes, imagined the hands that once held it, the decisions embedded in the careful words. Each letter seemed to echo the invisible choices she had carried throughout her day, each sentence a reminder of the quiet friction between thought and action. She paused, drawing a slow breath, and felt the subtle pulse of understanding settle into her chest. Cognitive dissonance was no longer an abstract term. It had become tangible, something she could see, feel, and trace through the rhythm of her life. Every small compromise, every internal justification, every polite smile that masked discomfort now formed a continuous thread through her experience. The tension remained, but it had shifted, from oppressive to illuminating. Outside, the sunlight had softened, spilling to the tall windows in gentle streaks that painted the marble floor in muted golds and silvers. She moved deliberately along the hall, observing each exhibit with fresh eyes, her mind gently cataloging the intersections of action, belief, and identity. She noticed a young visitor pause before the same sculpture that had first captured her attention, their expression mirroring the quiet unease she had once felt. A subtle smile tugged at her lips, a recognition of universality, the shared human navigation of contradictions. She reflected on the day, the choices, the quiet compromises, and internal debates that had once felt so consuming. Each decision, each moment of hesitation, was not a flaw but a window into the complexity of the mind. The friction of dissonance, she realized, was a guide rather than a punishment, a way for the psyche to signal misalignment, a call toward honesty and self-awareness. The weight of contradictions did not diminish, but its meaning had deepened. As she approached the museum's exit, the soft echo of her footsteps became a rhythm of contemplation. She looked back once more, absorbing the hall in its serene stillness, the artifact silently bearing witness to the human struggle between desire, duty, and conscience. She understood that growth was found not in perfection, but in the acknowledgement of conflict, in the careful reconciliation of action and belief. For a moment, she stood in quiet contemplation, aware that the internal dialogue would continue, but also that it was part of the journey, part of the intricate, layered architecture of consciousness. Cognitive dissonance, once a source of silent discomfort, had transformed into a subtle guide, teaching the patience and courage necessary to navigate the self. And as she stepped out into the muted evening light, the museum behind her felt less like a place of silent observation and more like a companion, a reflective guide to the corridors of the mind. The tension remained, but it was no longer a burden. It was a testament to the beauty, complexity, and depth of human psychology. A gentle invitation lingered in the air, to observe, to reflect, and continue exploring the quiet exhibits of the mind, each step offering insight, understanding, and the subtle clarity that comes from witnessing the human condition with honesty and care.